Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, is and true. Come roll with the yang gang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
We've got Daniel Larson on in the great state of Montana. Welcome to the Nerds for Humanity show. Daniel, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. So this is kind of a big deal for me. I was telling you that you were the first channel I discovered when I became a member of the Yang Gang. So you're kind of like my big deal. So yeah.
Well, you're a big deal because we don't have a lot of senatorial candidates on the show. We had Mike from Kentucky a few weeks ago, but you're our second, and I'm super interested in helping everyone out there get to know you better and to hear kind of your point of view on things. So why don't we start with like a very basic question, like who is Daniel Larson?
Yeah, so I'm a Montana native. I was born in Missoula, and then I went to high school. Grew up throughout the state, graduated high school in Missoula, went to the University of Montana. And then after grad school, I left the state and went to Las Vegas, and I ran a chocolate plant for Mars for about 10 years. And then I came back home, part of my dream to come back home and just make a go of it again in Montana. And it's been a pretty rough journey. And so some of the things in the universal basic income platform really appeal to people in the state. And I think it was going to catch on fire as Andrew Yang came through here. But since he's suspended, I'm just doing my part to try to keep the momentum going, because I saw it as something that was going through, my family. I was supporting it in my community. I was wearing my math ad at the hardware store, and it was one of those things that was I knew it was going to catch on. So I was managing a hardware store. A couple of hardware stores in the Valley when I decided to run. So about a month ago. So I've been a candidate for U.S. Senate for the last few days. It's been pretty exciting. It's awesome. A lot. It's a learning experience. It's pretty fun.
I can't wait to dig into it. And I will say thank you to Kristen Slevin for giving a big shout out to the Republican Yang Gang. Kristen was on the show a few days ago, and she referred to herself as like a Yang publican?
Yeah, that comment came up on Zach and Matt yesterday when I was on. Somebody came up, this like, yeah, Yang publican. So we might have to trend the hashtag and see how it works. So.
There's quite a few of folks. I guess that's the beauty of the Yang Gang. It's a very diverse kind of segmented group. It's been hard post Yang kind of suspending the campaign to keep the movement together. But I kind of feel like this Corona thing. Oh, sorry. Kristen describes herself as a Yangocrat, which is like probably not a traditional Democrat, like just Yang.
only because of Yang. Yeah, I think there was going to be a few of those. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's like me. Like I don't like seafood, but I will eat salmon sushi, but that's it. Like no other kind of fish kind of thing. So maybe Kristen's like, not always going for Democrats, but Yang's one of them. So let me ask you this, Daniel, before we get into your run, I'd love to learn about that transition from working at a modern kind of manufacturing plant in Nevada, to then working as a retail store manager. Like those aren't common kind of skill sets. I was curious how you thought about that.
Yeah, so I've been a manager of people in a lot of different environments, and so even going through college, I was a supervisor as a luggage handler. But they're two different industries as far as retail versus manufacturing. Working for Mars is a pretty good corporate citizen, so it had a lot of principled philosophies, paid people pretty well. There was enough money to go around. In the retail environment, especially, small businesses in local communities, it's a totally different animal. Your budget lines are much, much smaller. You're dealing with a lot more personnel turnover. So you're trying to inspire people, with things that give them intrinsic motivation, like, just respect and different things like that, without necessarily being able to compensate them that well financially. So.
Yeah, I mean, coming from manufacturing and then retail, did you see any of the effects of automation in your jobs, or was it not really affecting Mars and the hardware retail industry that much?
So I entered the manufacturing plant as an industrial engineer. So it was my job for a long time to increase efficiency.
Oh, you were part of the problem.
Yeah. So, but Andrew was talking about it more like out into the future. But I think we have a lot of organizations that are trying to reduce labor overall. It's one of those things where I think you can make a value-added case for increasing efficiency, but the scope of what we're talking about with the fourth industrial revolution is much more substantial. So it's every time you move a belt on a chocolate line, to eliminate one person, or every time a company is. I did a couple of other manufacturing plants as a production manager here in the state, and they were originally smaller businesses that were kind of built it created a lot of value by the original owner, and then private equity firms come in, and then they have kind of a sort of a heartless set of metrics, where they're not really trying to create value of the business, they're trying to extract cash. And those environments, I think, are the production environments that really were disheartening for me. The retail environments are kind of fun. I think it's a social interaction. People are getting a lot of things out of it, but it's not necessarily making people's lives more financially stable.
Yeah, I guess, the Amazon threat, I don't feel like I would order that much stuff from Amazon that I would, normally go to like True Value or whatever hardware store I would typically go to.
Yeah.
It seems like when you need the hardware store, like you probably need it like today kind of thing. I don't know. Did you find any impact, or was the business going pretty good?
Yeah, actually, hardware stores are in direct competition with Amazon, especially in rural areas. So there's a real effect where there might be some closures, I think, coming up. Just because, like, Amazon is capable of putting any product in any supply chain at your door in like 24 hours. So if you're coming to the hardware store and you need a specific bolt, I'm like, well, I can order it for you and let me see if it's in my supply chain. Well, I don't have it. I would have to go to Amazon at that point and get that bolt. So there's a lot of things that used to happen on that one-on-one interaction where, people still value that social contact, but they definitely, Amazon gets easier and easier for most of our everyday purchases. And some of our Main Street businesses, if we don't come in and help them out, communities across the nation will suffer some of the effects that we saw in, when manufacturing declined in the United States.
Yeah, it was interesting when I was just doing a little research on you before, we scheduled this interview. It was interesting that the media kind of reported you as like this guy that, like, they almost positioned you as this guy that just like crawled out from behind the cash register. They don't talk about you being someone who worked in a factory as an engineer, or someone who's a manager of a couple of retail stores.
Yeah.
Do you find that, like, is that part of?
I kind of like it. It gives them an element of discovery. It's like, wait a second, I think we only went one layer deep. And I intentionally put my math hat on, and I intentionally had it in my regular, Ace Hardware vest, because I think we find that we misjudge people. And I wanted them to misjudge me at first, and then discover, hey, wait, here's a person that doesn't think he's better than other people. He's smart enough to do this, and he's actually got a proposal out there that's going to make my life better. So I think that I think that might be interesting to folks.
So how has that been for your campaign, especially with this COVID thing? I'm guessing like a lot of the traditional tools that you have available, like you can't hang out and have a table in front of the Walmart or wherever. It's just must be hard. Or is it, how are you handling that?
Well, the first couple of days were kind of easy because once it went out on the first thing that happened was an NPR broadcast that went across the state, and people were coming into the hardware store. They're like, thank you for doing this. It's about time. And they didn't even know what I was doing with UBI and all this other stuff. So I think there's a market out there, or a captive voter that is actually really displeased with the establishment, both on the Democrat side and the Republican side. And, you know, I knew it through conversations with people in my community because I live in a bright red county and a bright red, small town. And so it's like I'm, really getting the voices of how people are thinking about these things. And there's a lot of people that are, they support some of the Republican Party, but not quite all of it. But the campaigning part, originally when I knew I had that interview going out, so it's a statewide network of TVs, stations. So I knew it was going to be on everybody's Sunday night viewing list. And I immediately went to Vegas, and I was like, I went to the chocolate factory, and I'm like, all right, so this is what I want to do, and then I went across the street to their station. I'm like, you guys want to do this interview? Because I thought if I stacked them up, like that would be pretty exciting, where people, underjudged me, and then I demonstrated some real experience, a digital resume.
Right.
But then when you start going through this process, you realize, like, what does it mean when you have the world's, one top 2, top 3, like private owned companies, have an interaction with a political candidate. That's a huge, huge deal. And it doesn't usually happen. And then, Vegas has a few more things going on to hear about a local chocolate plant manufacturer running for the U.S. Senate. So I was surprised. I thought immediately they were going to call me. It was going to be a big deal. But I think this time works really well for the Yang Gang because we're digital. And on the Republican side, it's a very insular market as well. So if you look at what was happening in the last election with the Trump supporters, if you had somebody had a diagram, and it'd be great to pull it up. I'd put it on the website. But what it was is it was a diagram map of all the communications happening on the right. And it's this community that only talks to itself, like an echo chamber. And I think the Yang Gang can help penetrate that echo chamber, because that would be a lot of individual people reaching out and establishing relationships with people. And it would be far more effective than advertising or anything like that. Because
did you say is this on the Dan for Montana website?
No, I don't have it up. I don't have it up. I was just talking about it. I was like, well, that's one of the things that I think might make sense. And since you're a true nerd, I thought I could nerd out with you a little bit about strategy.
Well, I mean, what kind of data are you able to kind of look at to get a sense of either where you stand or where you need to kind of invest your energy?
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting thing going on in the current landscape in which you can almost judge a political strength by Twitter followers. So if you look at it, like Andrew got to 1.5 million or something like that, and you have our current president sitting at, I don't know, it's like 72, 75. And like Barack Obama is like 110. And so my incumbent senator, the one I'm running against in the June 2nd primary, he's got like a 35K following. And the Democratic challenger is about 110,000 or something like that. So that would be an indicator of my strength. And so my Twitter is actually, percentage wise has went from 0 to about 500 right now. But in the last day, it got 100. So So that's a pretty good growth rate, and I could definitely see the trajectory getting there. But it's going to take a little bit of work.
Yeah, and that handle, just so everyone knows, is what's the handle? Is it?
It's
Dan for
at
Montana?
Dan for Montana. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let me put that up there. Let's see. So there's at Dan for Montana.
But within the election, Trump won this state by 20 points. And I think that incumbent senators like Steve Daines, they think that translates to them. But knowing the electorate a little bit more, I think I'm able to see it as that Trump vote was an activist vote. I think people are really tired of the establishment. And so I think that 20% is ready for me. Plus, I think that there's an open primary, so I'm able to get independents and Democrats that want to change the Venn diagram and start to get the center going. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess if it's an open primary, that's a great plus. And then tell me about why you think the incumbent is not doing a good job. I mean, I'm guessing people must have liked him enough to vote for him at least one time. What's he not doing?
So it's so the Senate terms are 6 years. So you have to look at where we've been in the last 6 years. And there's a couple of things on the Republican side that have been really upsetting to people. You can start it with the last Obama nomination of Neil Gorsuch, and then some other federal judge appointments, and then how the Republican Party has kind of latched onto Trumpism and started to develop very far right messages. And I think a lot of people, when they start to see the lines blur between the separations of power, and we have a lot of legislators that are willing to go along with it to maintain a power base, I think it scares a lot of people. I mean, it scared me. That's why I'm here. So I think that technically on paper, he's very strong, right? So an incumbent Republicans like to build power. That's been the strategy for the last 30 years. But when you look at his FEC filings, and it's just thousands of corporate contributions, and our lives aren't getting better and our lives aren't changing, I think it's reasonable for a new voice to come in and say, I can care about the things that you care about, but I can actually improve the things that you're seeing.
How are Montanans doing? Like as a state, is it? You mentioned that the job situation was different when you moved back versus Nevada and Las Vegas. Like, what's the economy pre-COVID? Like, what's the economy, and what are the issues?
We talk about the economy as being mostly like cattle or agriculture and mining, and there's some energy sector jobs. So those are the jobs we talk about. But in the reality, most of them, so like 60% of them are like service level and tourism jobs. And then there's a lot of like state jobs. So like the health infrastructure and then the government infrastructure comes up with about another third. And then resource extraction makes that a pretty sizable chunk of that last third. So overall, we're like highest in suicides. So the economics of Montana, we have a real low population base. We have, the fourth largest state. So our state infrastructure gets divided. Our state dollars or, government funds actually get divided. And then our economies are all based off of a lot of extraction-based economies or agriculture economies, which tend to suffer some pretty devastating effects. Like you can see it just with the cattle market right now. Everybody's just sitting on cattle and they can't sell them at a reasonable price. And it's because of industry consolidations in the packing industry. And then the energy boom just took a big hit. So there's a lot of people struggling all the time, but we have a high rate of entrepreneurs, and I think there's a lot of people that want to add value. It's just the economic resources have never really been in the state at a people level. So we tend to export our children and import retirees because it is a pretty fun place to live as far as it's beautiful and there's some developments like over towards Bozeman, it becomes like Aspen, Colorado, or Jackson Hole, and so there's people living like just totally different experiences in this state. So you have, billionaires, and then you have trailer parks is kind of how it works.
Wow. Yeah. So I guess I could see why universal basic income could be quite a impactful policy in Montana, especially since you're saying there's a lot of entrepreneurs as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like if you think about it, like I live in a town of 2,000 roughly. So that's $2 million a month going on to the main streets here. Mm-hmm. That would be amazing. It would, like all of our churches and civic organizations and small business owners I could say that it's my fiduciary responsibility as a hardware store manager to push UBI, because it would instantly, I think, nearly double the value of that business. So,
oh yeah. Yeah. Because people would probably, with a little extra money, they probably invest more in their houses and do some repairs and just sort of, they'd have a little bit more. I mean, the whole main street would probably see some significant benefits. And
plus the other thing in Montana, though, is having a worker have more advocacy in their job choice. So leveling the playing field and negotiating your employment relationship, I think, is really important, because Montanans have been kind of abused for a long time. People pay lower than market rates because they know that there's a workforce ready to take any job. And so sometimes that leads to unsafe conditions or conditions with employers that you wouldn't choose unless they were your only option. Yeah.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah. A little bit more leverage on the side of the working folk is probably overdue. Let me ask you this. You don't see a ton of Republicans who are former Yang supporters or in the Yang gang running for office. There are a lot of Republicans, like disgruntled Republicans, I think, in the Yang gang. But I'm curious, like for you, what was that journey like? How did you get yanged, and what was the thought process?
Yeah, so I got yanged at the hardware store. So I'm usually to the left of the people in the hardware store, and they were talking about the Democratic debates in July, and they were just making fun of the whole process and kind of ribbing it. And one of the people that work for me goes, and I respect his opinion quite a bit. And I thought he was just making a joke, but he goes, "There's only one guy I like, and he's that Asian guy that wants to give everybody money." And so I went home and I did my research, and I think it started actually on your channel. And but Yang had put out like hours and hours of long form pieces, and really you could tell that this guy, he was normal. He was a regular problem solver, and and he had spent his time thinking about, okay, what would it really take to make life better for all of us? And I have never really seen that in a political candidate. So it activated me. We all have political opinions where it's like, this sucks, that sucks. These people are terrible. But seeing Yang, so him and I are similar ages, and, we've had different experiences, but I saw a lot of what he was talking about in everything that I've done. And so to me, that really activated, okay, so this is something that could truly, truly change things. So I supported the campaign. I had a UBI rally in Stevensville, which was me, putting a bunch of flags on my F-150 and then going up and down the street. And then I took it to Missoula. It was pretty fun. But I see it as one of those things where I started, I did the research, me and my wife, we kind of, it bonded us together. And then, so that and the 6 people in my family and then people at the hardware store. But I knew it really had momentum when I was sitting in a group of my family members. We were together for a birthday or something like that. There was like 12 people in the room, and I was wearing my math hat. And we're a pretty lively bunch, from diverse backgrounds, and there's a lot of politics and religion being discussed all the time. and they had asked me about, what does math mean? And I was like, let me tell you, and I sold an entire room within the span of like 30 minutes. They were like smiling. They were like, oh, wow, this is a really good thing. And I knew that this was different than anything I'd ever talked about before, just with its ability to touch people. So.
Totally. Yeah. I remember I had dinner with a bunch of former grad school classmates and lots of Republicans. And we were talking about the race. And at that time, Yang was still in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting in that of all of the Democratic candidates, most of the Republicans around the table would not even consider supporting any of them. They were just like, oh, it's, a bunch of clowns and not really, haven't thought through their proposals,
Mm-hmm.
But then when we got to Yang, it was interesting. Like these were like pretty big time kind of hedge fund types.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, that his stuff actually kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, but my Republican friends, they're more like, they're like 90s Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
They're not like 2020 Republicans.
Right.
They're not Trump Republicans.
Right. Yeah.
And so they're very into economics and efficiency and allocation of resources and minimizing bureaucracy.
Right.
And so for them, the freedom dividend is fantastic. It's like, yeah,
Right.
why should we have these huge like government bodies? Like, let's just put power and resources in the hands of the people. They kind of it touches the libertarian side of everybody. But I feel like the Republican Party today is not like the Republican Party that I grew up with.
Right.
It's not the Alex P. Keaton Party at all. Right, for any of the older folks watching and know that.
Yeah,
reference.
that used to be on every day at 3:00 when I got home from school.
That's right. That's right. You'd be
It's been a long time since I've heard Alex P. Keaton brought up. But
he was a childhood hero of mine.
Right. Right.
And because, like he thought through stuff, he prided himself in knowing the numbers, and he would like really get into details. But I feel like today's Republican Party, the party of Trump, let's just say, is more visceral. It's more emotional. It's actually the way I remember Republicans in the 90s would talk about Democrats.
Right.
Like, Democrats, they're bleeding hearts. They don't really think through their plans. And now you've got a Republican Party that, is led by someone who isn't really into the details. And you've got a Republican Senate that at a minimum is just enabling that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, what's your take on the state of the party?
Yeah, that was my final straw as far as where the Senate is. So the impeachment mattered to me as far as I think separation of powers is a pretty big deal. And so I had wrote our senator during the trial. So I kind of got sucked into it. I watched pretty much every minute. And so when it came to the floor votes for subpoenas of documents and witnesses, that's the first time I reached out. And to me, there's no case for acquittal if you're not running a good trial. So I was already disappointed that there wasn't, because I read the transcript and it only takes about, 15 minutes, if that, to read it. And I thought that there was enough information to at least merit a couple of Republican votes in Congress. And by the time I got to the Senate, I thought that at least a few people would support doing this seriously. So it was very concerning for me because there's a couple of historical references that are scary. And I hope we're not there, but I don't want to set up a system that would allow fascism or anything else. And we're going through some challenging economic times now. So if we don't really fix this in a hurry, we're open to some pretty big problems.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that that whole impeachment thing was super interesting because I remember, I guess now it's like 5 or 6 years ago, there was a huge uproar over Obama having a lot of executive orders.
Yes, absolutely.
And saying, it's a republic. He doesn't understand the founding fathers, the genius of the co-equal branches. And now he can't get anything done in the Congress. So he's just writing these executive orders. And is this obvious, this kind of emperor-like abuse of power? Yeah. And then none of that seemed like that whole line of thinking went out the door. And then even before that, I remember the Tea Party talking about balancing budgets and fiscal responsibility. And I just feel like Trump has just kind of changed the whole game, and everything that was sacred, all of the core values of the party have been thrown out the window.
Yeah, I think they're just walking over to where they think the base is, where they think that the votes are. And I think that they're throwing the party away when they go down that long tail, and try to get those really far right voters. I think that we need to have messages that actually come from the center. And I think we need to be more independent of corporate influence as well, because the corporations are running the establishment of both parties, and the Republican Party has a really big issue right now with just a lack of it's a lack of individual conviction. Does that make sense? So we don't really have a McCain sitting there. I mean, I guess we got a little Mitt Romney sitting there trying to be the voice of dissent. And then Justin Amash, when he peeled off, I found that pretty interesting as far as he's able to have an independent voice. And I thought more people were going to gravitate towards, what he was doing. And I've just been shocked. Over the last 3 years, it feels like we all got a little bit of PTSD. But
yeah, it's I do feel like losing McCain was a big loss for the country. Yeah. I did not support him when he was running for president. I was very troubled by his vice presidential choice.
What do you mean? I mean, come on. That was such a normal choice, right? So
Right.
That's what happens when you throw a dartboard. Be like, okay, well, we want somebody that's like this,
Yeah. I mean, that was a Hail Mary, clearly. But I do appreciate. I did like him when he was running against George W. in the primaries back.
Yeah. Actually, I could have seen that would have brought a whole new world of Republicans into the party. And then if he would have, if you remember the primaries from that season, that's when I discovered that the establishment was so terrible, because it's like they were going neck and neck, him and Bush, and then all of a sudden he just was like, well, I'm done, And then I remember when I was working at the airport, he would just fly out and do a 15-minute handshake with the candidate, try to build up their numbers. And it's just well, the establishment makes you do some pretty weird things as far as, because I think he would have been better for America than George W.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, although I don't know, he was pretty hawkish. I think he was pretty, he was pretty, wanted to take a very muscular approach with Iran at that time.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean,
well, I think I would appreciate if the Republican Party was way less hawkish. That's where I'd like to move it over time. But
it's so interesting. We are very eager to build democracies in other places, but not as much in our own country.
Yeah. So talking to some people with some really deep military experience, I think it's one thing I would agree is that usually the United States has a good intent. But through execution, there's definitely some issues that we need to look at.
Yeah, when you think about the let's talk about some current events right now. We obviously have this big stimulus. If you had you been in the Senate, what would your position have been on that plan?
I would have been promoting. So if you'd imagined if stimulus came out with some sort of durability and some sort of easy, digestible format. So Tulsi Gabbard's resolution, I think, was simple, short enough to probably get through immediately. And then it would have established a framework where people knew that the economy had some legs. And I think that more than the money of doing something like that first, the message that it gives to the market would have been far more impactful than I think the recent piece of stimulus. So we're spending $2 trillion, but people are unclear on what those benefits will actually be. And with the volatility in the market, I think you need to send a very clear, reasonable message that's digestible by everybody. Because our economy is just, we just think that money is everything that we're doing. But right now, we have the most valuable thing that we own, which is our time. And so it's our resource that we never grow, we never get any more of, and we sell off pretty cheaply. But I think we can use this time to strengthen our families and subsequently our communities by doing that as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was actually took me a little while to get any data visualization of where the $2 trillion was going. And I found a Bloomberg article that, can you see this now?
I can.
Yeah. So as you can see here, about 500 billion goes to business, quite corporations, some local government. A lot of it goes to airlines. Mm-hmm. And then there's small business loans. The actual direct payments is only 290 billion out of 2 trillion, so about 15%. Yeah. And then you've got unemployment, almost as many tax cuts as direct payments. And what I found interesting was there's only 126 billion, so about 6 or 7% going to hospitals.
Yeah, you would imagine. Care. Yeah. So with the way they're selling it, it's definitely, I'm glad that you pulled this up. So, because you hear all the numbers, but with the way they're selling it sounds like they spent the majority of their money on hospitals and critical infrastructure. But I think
our buddies in big business were involved in the writing of this one.
Yeah, so definitely, if I was in the Senate, I think I would propose a couple of reversals of this. I think that state and local funds are always good dollars to spend because those are the systems of government that we have closest to the people. And the fact that, direct payments are 290 plus 260, so 500 billion. With this level of stimulus and for the level of stability that you could create it with, I think even less money immediately, I just don't think we're going to get the same impacts.
Yeah.
Because big business doesn't usually funnel real economic value. So.
No, I mean, I think with the big Trump tax cuts, the corporate tax cuts, I don't think most of the corporations, suddenly hired like 20% more people. I think a lot of that money went back to the shareholders and buybacks and stuff. Yeah.
Well, and I think that there was a couple of things that were happening in the economy that were just price escalations of stock price without real value creation. And I think that tax cut was one of them. So they priced it into the market before Trump ever even executed it. And then we had a really fragile energy sector. I think we still have a really fragile housing sector. And I think what we communicated last time with the $4.2 trillion is like, go ahead, guys, do whatever you want. We'll eventually use the U.S. government to bail you out when you make a whole bunch of bad decisions. So I would like a lot of the people making bad decisions to have to answer for what they're doing.
Yeah, it's sad if we don't have great transparency in a bill that they just voted for. Mm-hmm. Who knows what's going to happen when all that money gets sloshed around and sent out? I doubt we're going to get a quarterly report on where that $500 billion that went to big business, what happened to it?
Well, we
You
should
know?
institute the American scorecard just as just to make sure that we're talking about the results clearly. Because
Yeah.
when we had inverted yield curves last fall, everybody was still touting, oh, the economy is going to go up forever, and it turns out it wasn't. So
Yeah. If it's funny because Trump loves to talk about how he's a businessman and everything. I mean, if a bank or a business lent another entity $500 billion, they would demand all kinds of transparency, reporting, accountability, and I haven't heard them talk at all about. I think I've heard them say like these companies are not allowed to use it for buybacks, stock buybacks.
right.
But I would be okay. But what are they going to do with the money then? Like,
I think those are just some of the talking points that they threw in the bill just to
Yeah.
make sure that they could cover it. It's like, well, executives, you can't buy back your stock and we're going to limit your executive pay. But just the proportion of the money going directly to businesses, if you fund through a UBI, what you're doing is you're creating a model in which the corporations have to go to the people for their money. And that's always going to be better than giving it to the corporations first, because there's at least some sort of contract of value at that level. And now it's just like, what do we have big corporations because we like big buildings? Or I don't know.
I mean, that's something where I have to admit, Bernie makes a great point where he's like, hey, if you're so anti-socialism, why do you keep giving money to corporations?
Oh, I got to tell you, there aren't a whole lot of Bernie supporters in Montana, but when he was on the floor just letting them have it, I was like, I like this video. I like what he's saying right now. I don't agree with him on some of his platforms, but you got to give him some credit for being so passionate about
absolutely
calling things out.
And if you like, why are there some people in DC picking which corporations get this money and how much? Like, who made them God? Like, if you believe in the free market, to your point, give it in the hands of the consumer. The consumers will pick which companies they want to.
I have a theory, and if we want to investigate it, it's probably in the FEC filings of each candidate that's running for office. So,
that would be an interesting data visualization. The recipients of these funds, and then
if you could put that together for me, that'd be great.
That would be a ultimate chart. Yeah. Well, Dan, I want to make sure we save time for some questions from the audience. So, folks, in the chat, if you have questions, feel free to type it in, and you can just put like question : so I know that you guys are asking Dan or me and not talking to each other, which is totally fine as well. But before we get to those questions from the audience, Dan, are there other sort of issues or policies or kind of perspectives that you're really passionate about that we didn't get to talk about that we can talk about now?
Oh, I think there's some opportunities for some climate change discussions that we should be having as part of the stimulus package as well. So we are talking about humanity, but I think there's a lot of areas for growth within, I would like to bring some of that growth back to the state of Montana. So I think there's some reasonable conversations that we can have as Republicans to say, okay, let's start agreeing that there's a problem within climate science, but here's the opportunities economically. So.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm quite curious. On the one hand, I would imagine, many people in Montana appreciate nature and the beauty of, the planet as it's been given to us.
Yeah, actually, clean air and clean water are in the Montana state constitution.
I love it. Yeah. So I could totally see that. And by the way, did you ever see the movie The Hunt for Red October?
Yeah.
Do you remember when there was a Russian guy and he's like, "Oh, I would like to see Montana."
I don't remember that line. I was younger. It was 30 years ago or so.
Yeah, I'm dating myself again with the Alex V. Keaton stuff too. So at any rate, he really he defected from the Soviet Union and wanted to see Montana and took a Soviet submarine with him. Yeah, but at any rate,
was that the last scene that was supposed to be in Montana? Because I thought it was a Canadian border.
They were going towards Maine, but they were talking about how what life would be like in the US, and they were like, oh, could you travel from state to state? And the captain, Sean Connery, is like, yeah, sure you can. He's like, oh, no papers are required. It's like, no papers.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I would love to see Montana. At any rate, I digress. I'm curious about the environmental stuff, because you also talked about some of the Montana economy is from extraction. Is that mining or natural gas? Or
yeah, we do have natural gas. We also have some shale oil, and then we have a lot of minerals, so copper, silver. There's even a lot of logging as well. So timber, I think, is kind of an extraction as well.
So on the one hand, it's one of the most beautiful states. I've never visited, but it's absolutely on my list. So you would imagine people, to your point with the state constitution, like clean air, clean water is very important. On the other hand, you could see people saying, oh, these snowflakes are trying to stop us from, making a living, and they're going to block any type of economic development. They're going to, be these tree huggers, yada, yada. So I'm kind of curious, what do you think the Montanans think about climate change and environmental?
The interesting thing is, one of the first people that got a hold of me, it was with a letter, and it's from, if you can see my map up here, I think it's from a county that's way kind of right by the D. Okay. And so they have one of the largest deposits of silver and copper underneath the Cabinet Range up there in Libby and Troy. And this man was super concerned, and I would consider him a far right Republican. But so I think we all love the world that we live in, and we all appreciate the value that it has. I think we are willing to realize that we do need some natural resources just to make the economy function. But I don't think we want to make the trade-off of opening up our clean water, especially because the mining operator that wants to pull that out of the ground also, I'll show you on the map here, did a project right around here with a different, so the CEO did another project at a company that went bankrupt and left the state paying for the remediation of water. And that's right next to an Indian reservation that's currently trying to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. I'll show you right here, right, coming in right here. So there's a lot of things that are kind of converging in Montana. So if you think about where the high water mark for global warming could be, it could be stopping that Keystone XL pipeline, not out of real, just sheer activism, but more out of, it doesn't really make financial sense anymore. So these oil and gas operators are facing bankruptcy, and there's a big chance that these are going to be stranded assets in the state. And people talk a lot about pipelines like they're just okay, but they leak all the time. And so it's one of those things. It's like, why are we doing this? This is Canadian oil going to all the way down to Texas, and it's not really developing our domestic source of oil. It's more or less like just trying to generate profits in the current market. And tar sands oil is like 30% more energy intensive. So you're actually pulling natural gas out of the ground to boil it. And it's just, I think we should leave it in the ground right now, especially until we figure something else out.
Yeah, I mean, it's with the falling oil prices,
right?
It totally makes sense why a lot of these things actually just don't make economic sense, set aside the impact on the environment. Do you think that Republicans are making the same conclusion? Because part of me feels like it stopped being about economics, and it started to become more kind of this like my team versus your team, and I'm for the XL pipeline, and I don't care what the prevailing price of sweet crude is. Like, I just want it, because I don't want you coastal liberal telling us what to do with our land.
Well, here's the problem. The oil companies have been valued based off of their stockpile of explored energy, and their price is based off of us burning everything that they have explored. And I think we reached peak oil, was it last year, something like that? So us as a globe, when we start talking about climate change and the impacts of climate change, it puts a lot of people that already have investments and already have a share price that's based off of these resources in a very precarious position, and they're willing to spend a lot of money to develop the political resources necessary to sustain these business models. So as we look at candidates in the future, I think that we need to make sure that they're independent of some of these corporate voices.
Right on. All right. Well, let's get on to some of the questions from the audience, and let me just kind of pull up the first one that I can see. I think it was from Kristen. What do you love most about Montana and America?
Well, since I'm running for U.S. Senate, it's got to be the people. But Montana is got a lot of places where you can sit and just think about things. So I think that is important. Originally, there was an intent. I think it was Jefferson that envisioned us all having sort of this agrarian lifestyle, and then we'd go serve, as public servants, and then come back. And I think I think they had a sense for the wisdom that's created, when you have some time to reflect and when you're looking out at some of the more beautiful things in life. So I think that is kind of what I like about the USA, is the fact that we've developed a system that allows us to share our voices and our unique perspectives and work together and use our collective wisdom to solve problems. I don't think we've been doing it very well, but I think it's a great opportunity in the U.S. Right
on. Here's the next question. You mentioned a little bit of retirees coming in and younger folks going out. Like what do you think is behind that? What's going on? Where are they going? And do you think that's something that Montana should try and reverse or address?
Yeah, our communities are really affected by this. The smaller the community, the more it's affected. So I think brain drain was listed in this, and I remember my graduation from Montana, University of Montana. The governor at the time in his commencement was like, "Please stay here," or if you go, please come back. And it's because you can't just have a retired population. There just isn't enough there. And then we do need new entrepreneurs. We need new cities. Like, I was maybe a week or two away from creating Facebook with a friend at that time. And, you never know what type of opportunities are coming next when you keep smart people at the table. And it's not that there aren't smart people left. It's just, we need to develop, encourage, and start to build the cities of the future. And I think Montana is an opportunity for that.
Right on. Ooh, I've got a controversial one. This is going to be perhaps hard for you to answer and make everybody happy.
it just won't happen. I promise on this one. Yeah.
What's your take on universal health care, public options, single payer, fully privatized, something else?
I'd see it as a multi-year solve, and the last thing I want to do is something before we implement universal basic income. But healthcare is a system in which the federal government's probably the only player big enough to make substantial change. I just want to see the federal government step in and demonstrate a ability to regulate, create price transparency, eliminate inefficiencies in the system. Maybe offer a major medical I think we focus on healthcare costs first, and then have public options for the people that need them, but the government can't pick up a $2 trillion bill in healthcare every year, I don't think.
All right. Speaking of this, another kind of healthcare, but maybe not entirely question. What's your take on legalizing marijuana?
So I want to approach it from what I would do as a federal legislator. And as a federal legislator, I would be pushing for a bill to remove it from the schedule, the federal drug schedule. So I think that its current level of criminalization is inhumane. But I don't, I'll let states choose on how they want to to act. Montana was actually the first state to adopt marijuana. They were the first one to legalize medical marijuana. And then the state legislator actually kind of repealed it and made it more restrictive. So it's kind of been a hot topic in the state for a while, but I don't see why marijuana belongs in any of our criminal justice discussions.
Yeah, marijuana is another interesting economics question, because the cost of enforcing all of these federal laws around criminalizing marijuana, you wonder, like, is that the highest and best use of our limited law enforcement resources?
Yeah, and if a state wants to make something legal and generate tax revenue off it, I think that's fine. It reduces their dependency on federal funds for a lot of things.
Yeah. All right. Well, a bunch of people were asking about legalizing marijuana. Well, so we got your position on that one. Cool. I think the last thing is not a question, but it's an interesting point from Kailani McAlpine. Kailani says, "I've always loved Montana for its beauty, but you couldn't live there because of the job situation." Have you heard that? Like, is it?
Yeah, that's absolutely my story. Like, if I had something like UBI in my life, I would probably be working on a ranch over by Great Falls. But it's one of those things where I love the agricultural lifestyle. My family, one generation up, there was multiple ranches that kind of, I spent a lot of time on, and I would love the idea of just working outside and looking at the mountains all day. But even, because my uncle still operates the ranch, and even I've approached, hey, could I even make this work? And I can't. The finances are just not there. Agriculture doesn't support a high enough revenue to actually even pay for the labor that's necessary to run these operations. So I think something like UBI would allow a lot of people to kind of go to a more peaceful agrarian lifestyle. And I would be promoting that, as far as this is something that could make everybody a little bit better off.
I kind of feel like I can sense like Thomas Jefferson smiling above us right now, talking about this agrarian lifestyle. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about UBI is we often talk about it as this floor for individuals, which it is, but it's also levels the playing field a little bit between states.
Yeah.
Because I know when I came out of college, it was like, where are the jobs? Boston, New York, San Francisco, LA.
And then you got to pay $4,000 a month to live in those places. And so we're just spinning wheels at some point.
Yeah. All right. Tamar has a question around the gig economy. Does it make sense to pair a job with your health care? I think the point being, like, it's hard for people to get health insurance from a company if they're in a gig economy job. And just thoughts on, is there a gig economy in Montana, or just your thoughts on the gig economy in general?
Yeah. So the gig economy, I think that like the guy that does videos for me, he's a part-time Uber driver. There's a lot of people that are, they put a snowplow on their truck to make a couple $100 a year. And then there's people that are just given contracts. So there's people making, $60,000-$65,000 a year, but it's just short term. Those might have some level of benefit option. But so I do think that we do need to revise healthcare enough where we could all afford it. So I think I would be very supportive of what we do with HSAs. I think that for both student loans and for healthcare, moving to separating, maybe including something like a 401k for people to pay their student loans. And then I think it's really critical to detach healthcare from employment. So just having to do different budget lines through all types of different businesses. Budgeting for healthcare is one of those things where employees just never see the benefit of the cost that you're putting into it. So everybody's kind of upset in the system. And I think that lower premiums for everybody is where I would go with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another one where there's an interesting economic argument around, like, is it really efficient for the labor economy and for companies to be in the business of like managing these complex kind of insurance plans?
No, I don't
And,
think so.
Yeah. Like if you want labor to have some mobility, does it make sense to have them dependent on a company just because like they have a great health insurance plan? Like I had a few years where I was a business owner and we spent a ton of money on our health insurance for our employees.
Right.
In fairness, we were in Seattle competing for high-tech talent. So like you had to.
Right.
But I always felt like, wow, we were a small startup spending a ton of money on health insurance. And I'm sure we weren't getting like great deals because we had very little bargaining power. And that's one of those things where like, yes, you could take the social kind of like emotional or like fairness argument, like everybody should have healthcare, which is super compelling.
Yeah.
But there's also a hard-nosed economic business one, which is like, this is just not an efficient system where every company provides its own version of healthcare. Like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, it's terribly inefficient. And I would say in Montana, I think our first thing that we need to work on is rural access to healthcare. So people don't think about this, but if you're out in a lot of our communities and you suffer any one of a number of different ailments, you're on a medevac flight, to Seattle or Salt Lake. And those bills are like, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so we've got to do something with critical access. We've got to do something at least as a level to improve healthcare in rural areas. And I think that to me is bigger than just how every individual person is going to pay for it. But
totally. It is another one where you would think Republicans would take a bigger lead on this because the current system absolutely does not harness the power of markets at all. Like,
no,
markets aren't perfect, but generally like people, when there's competition and when people have spending power and they, and in a normal economy, if I have to go and I need medical care, I'm going to do research. I'm going to do price comparisons. I'm going to see which one's good. But, in today's world, if you go to the hospital, you just tell the doctor, like, do whatever you can to make me well.
Yeah. And there's so much information asymmetry in it.
Right,
and everybody's making money. So the insurance company, the hospital, and they're intentionally keeping things very invisible as far as the behind the scenes. So I think there was already some framework in the ACA to increase price transparency. And I think that needs to be moved to the forefront of the conversation.
I mean, ACA had a lot of Mitt Romney's thinking in there.
Yeah.
But I guess because it was associated with a different, individual.
Yeah, I think we need to drop the Obamacare thing and just start calling it the ACA and then fix what's broken. And because the health insurance premiums of $1,000 a month is just not affordable. And then a lot of employers actually offer worse insurance than they used to. So, to have a $10,000 deductible is pretty crazy.
Totally. And then I have a MAGA family member, actually multiple, and one of them had to go buy health insurance, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so glad that we don't have Obamacare anymore because I was able to get health insurance for like $200 a month."
That's still Obamacare, right? So,
and well, the part of the problem was I was like, "Send me the information on what you bought," and it turns out that it was this kind of BS plan.
Oh, yeah.
Where like there's a massive deductibles, like basically like it really didn't give you any coverage. And I think because the ACA used to require some minimum sort of standards on plans, like those kind of cheap plans weren't available. But now with the rollbacks on many of the Obamacare kind of requirements, these like crappy insurance plans came out.
Yeah.
And then here he is like saying, "Oh, aren't you glad we have Trump? Now I can get healthcare for $200." I was like,
It's
dude,
all in the messaging, man. You could sell anything to anybody
yeah.
if you
I was
message
like,
it right. Yeah.
bro, I hope you don't get sick.
Well, I have 6 people in my household, so some of these deductibles, especially like the annual max, I'm like, I am so glad we haven't got hurt yet, you know?
Yeah.
But-
Here's another question from Sonali Kumar. Why didn't you enter the race earlier?
Yeah, because I was approaching it in different means. So there was a couple of like kind of inspirational candidates on the Democrat side. I think we had a person in Cora Newman that if she would have got through, I think she could have been maybe a contender to be an up and coming Democrat, potentially a presidential candidate. And then we actually had the mayor of Helena that was running as well. And you know, they're Montana style. So I was like, okay, well, I'll donate to these guys. And, you know, I thought it was going to change the world if I donated to Andrew Yang and talked to everybody about it. And, you know, so these doors start closing. You're like, okay. But I looked at it like we need ballots. So I wanted to make the November ballot in Montana something where it's a choice between good or better, you know, and people are comfortable with both any one of the options. So we give people binaries all the time where it's, we tend to promote it as it's like, vote for this person and the world's going to be okay. Vote for this person and it's going to be terrible. But what if we just had, you know, ballots across the country where it's like, wow, these are 2 pretty good people. Which one's better, you know? And so that's the way I see it. And I didn't run it earlier because I was a normal person, never thinking I was going to be a political candidate. But I think the time is now, and I think this is exactly what we need to do. We need to grow this gang to about 10.5 million people and be probably the most powerful voting bloc in this country.
Yeah, you know, the gang is probably might be one of the sort of undervalued constituencies out there, because I know Yang got like 400,000 unique donors.
And yeah, that's
right. And so if you assume like, well, for every 1 donor, there's probably 10 that supported him but didn't want to write the check. I mean, that's 4 million right there.
Yeah. Well, now imagine you get 4 more million on the Republican side, and then we pick up 4 million independents, and now we own the country. So it's not just like, it's not just what we're doing this cycle. It's what we're doing like long term. Like the early adopters of this believe in it, right? So if we keep together, if we keep organizing, if we keep moving, man, our children will be pro UBI candidates one day. So
it's amazing. You mentioned how you had invested a lot of time supporting Yang and volunteering and donating. I would say, I think in the long run, we will look back and say that was a very smart investment. I mean, already.
You know what the ROI is on? Okay, so I donated, I think like $400, right? And so if he would have gotten to the point where, so I have 2 adult children, or
right.
my second one just turned 18. So me, my wife, that would have been $4,000 in the household. The ROI is just crazy on that. I've never seen a better investment.
Yeah. And then if we get UBI in America 5-10 years from now, it will still have been an amazing investment. And I think people are talking about it even now, unfortunately, because of this economic crisis that we're about to enter right now. I mean, people are talking about it more in a more mainstream way. Than they would have before. I mean, even that chart we showed where there was direct payments to citizens, I don't know if that would have been even that, like if you'd said 5-10 years ago, that would have been quite radical. Like, whoa, wait a minute.
Bush did that $750 or $600 and some dollars. You remember it was back in 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
And I think that those effects were almost immeasurable. And so that's what concerns me, is just without promoting the durability of the payment, that we're just not going to get the same financial benefit.
That is one of the double-edged swords about people talking about direct cash payments, because I kind of feel like they are pigeonholing it as, well, in case of emergency, you can do this. But it kind of undersells the long-term kind of benefits that a consistent payout would have given everybody. But
yeah, and we're talking about potentially staving off like 30% unemployment and stuff like that. So I hope they choose UBI soon. Even if it's not us, but I think that voting block that I was talking about, it's like this rational problem solving model that stays in the middle, gets some support from the right and the left. Even beyond UBI, I think it's important.
Right on, Dan. Well, we are about a little over time, so I appreciate you coming on the show. I have to do a stream later, probably in the next hour or two, around COVID data visualization. So for all you chart lovers out there, I've got a ton that we're going to go over. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to share with everyone that your website is danformontana.com. On Twitter, people can follow you at Dan4Montana. Any final words before we wrap up, Dan?
Oh, just thanks for having me on. And if you ever want to have another conversation, I'm just sitting at home trying to run for U.S. Senate. So,
well, Dan, I really hope you make it, man, because you seem like a super reasonable, logical, rational person. Very, very Yangian.
Yeah. Imagine that,
I know. Like, stranger things could happen if we get some reasonable people in DC, and I'll keep my fingers crossed. And if any of you guys watching this now live or subsequently on replay are interested, go check out Dan's website, check out his take on issues. Really great background, has managed organizations, but also like works with real people in a hardware store as well. That's quite a nice combination, and it's certainly something that I will be watching very closely, and hope to have you back on the show again, ideally in the future as a senator, but maybe as the campaign runs along, we'll get you back for a follow-up conversation as well.
Absolutely. So as much as we can before June 2nd, then after that, we're just going to be talking about how amazing this is. So yeah.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. All right, Dan. Well, I will say goodbye, nerds. Everybody, you want to say goodbye, nerds?
Goodbye, nerds.